Right. Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming, and my students for coming, and former students for coming. So it's really a pleasure today to be able to host Dr. Yunus Mirza to come and talk to us about his very recent book, The Islamic Maryam Through the Centuries. Dr. Mirza has been associated with the Abu Sulaiman Center that is sponsoring this talk for a very long time. He's also somebody that I have known for a very long time. We've worked together. He's contributed to projects of my projects at the center, he's someone who has done a lot of interfaith work, and we've done some of that together. So it's really a pleasure to be able to host him here today. Dr. Yunus Mirza is a visiting researcher at Georgetown University and founding director of Global Virtual Learning at Shenandoah University. It's a really fascinating project. He defended his dissertation in Arabic and Islamic Studies from Georgetown University and has taught at Millsaps and Allegheny colleges. His current research focuses on the relationship between the Bible and the Quran and the shared stories between them. He is co-author of the book, The Bible and the Quran, Biblical Figures in the Islamic Tradition, and has published in various journals, including the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, as well as the Journal of Quranic Studies and Islamic Muslim Relations. In his teaching, he has been profiled by Interfaith America and has won a teaching award for his first-year seminar course. He regularly teaches courses on the Quran, biblical and Quranic prophets, marriage and sexuality in Islam, and Islam and other religions. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mirza.
Thanks so much. I want to thank Maria. Should I use this microphone or should I use it? Yeah. All right. So I want to thank Maria so much for that warm introduction. And Maria's been an important mentor for me. I look up to her a lot. Also, she's been someone that I read her work and her scholarship. Sometimes when you have someone locally at university, you don't necessarily know their profile or their expertise or their scholarship, but you're really fortunate to have her here. And she's someone who's respected in the field. And also, she's actually wrote a blurb for my book. So it's and when my publisher was making the flyer for the book to help promote it, they actually highlighted her blurb of all the different blurbs. So thanks so much, Maria, for your support. So I want to go ahead and begin this book talk discussing some questions to think about. So some of the things to think about as we move forward. And let me just turn this. I want to do a presentation. I don't know. All right, so for some of the things I want to think about first. Oh, Sam, do you know how to do the presentation? Yeah. Okay, so Sam will help me there on that. So some of the things for us to think about as we move forward is how are biblical and Quranic and Mary similar and different? So you can go ahead and figure that out. So one of the things that I've been really interested in my work on Quranic and biblical figures is how are they similar and how they're different. And in the work in interfaith and interreligious studies, there's often a tendency to go to one extreme or another. Some people argue that, they're all the same, with Christianity, Islam, there's no differences. But at the same time, there is the other extreme saying, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, they're nothing alike, they're all different. Okay. All right, great. All right, thanks so much. All right, great. And then another thing to think about is, can Mary Maryam be an interfaith figure? And can she be a bridge between different civilizations, the East and the West? Can she be someone that can bring Christianity, Islam together, or there can be some areas of shared spirituality and faith? And then lastly, how can Mary Maryam be a model for modern people, an inspiration for social justice? So this is a key question, especially with the recent events overseas and the rise of Islamophobia here in the United States, is that how can we think of religion and social justice? And what is the intersection between the two? So let me go ahead and start with the personal origins of the book. And I grew up in a family of girls, right? So I'm a product of a family of 4 siblings. I'm the only guy. I'm the only brother. I have 3 sisters. And I wanted to get involved in my sisters' activities to the point that they made me an honorary member of their Girl Scout troop. And now I'm grown up and I am a father and I have 3 daughters. And Maria and I were just speaking that we both have our kids, or I have one daughter and she has also another daughter, similar ages in college. So we've grown up. I have 3 daughters. I don't have any sons. And now I'm the cookie manager of all my daughter's Girl Scout troops. So if you want any Samoas or Thin Mints, please let me know. Cookie season is starting up pretty soon. So growing up in a family of girls makes you think about the place of women and religion, and especially when you have daughters, right? When you have daughters and you're raising them and you're teaching them, you're a professor or educator, you're trying to explain to them this tradition. And you're trying to explain to them where they fit within this tradition. And that puts a certain burden upon you where you start thinking about what tradition should I share, what should I not share, and what is their future role in the modern world while still being connected with history and tradition. Also, this book emerges from biblical and Quranic figures in the Islamic tradition. And this is my first book that came out. And Maria also has a blurb, thanks so much, on this book. And when I was writing this book, I became fascinated that there are 48 shared figures between the Quran and the Bible. So usually when we think about Islamic studies and we think about interreligious understanding, we sometimes think the Bible is over here and the Quran is over there. But in fact, there's many shared figures between them. And these shared figures are similar, but they're also different. They have similar plots and themes, but they're also distinct and unique. And as I was writing this book, I became fascinated with the figure of Mary and Maryam. She was the only female figure, as we'll speak about, discussed in the Quran. And she is someone who is referenced 34 times in different chapters and surahs. And when I was writing this book, it kind of, in many ways, connected me with my past because my name is Yunus, and who knows the biblical equivalent to that? Jonah, right? So my family actually has a history and tradition of naming their children after prophetic and biblical figures. So my oldest uncle is named Ishmael, and my second uncle is named Ibrahim. My third uncle is named Isaac Ishaq, and my dad, who is the youngest, is named Yaqub or Jacob. So there is this tradition in our family of naming the sons and also the female figures after historical names. And when I was being born, my dad actually went to my grandfather in Pakistan, and he asked him and said, if I have a girl, what should I name her? And if I have a boy, what should I name him? And he said, if you have a girl, name her Fatima, who was the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. And if you have a boy, name him Yunus. And first, my older sister Fatima was born, and then soon later, I came along. So there is this tradition, history, legacy within our family of naming our children, whether they're male or female, after prophetic names. And then this book, in many ways, represents my university education. So I went to school here at Langley High School. Then I went to Georgetown University. I was born in Indiana. And it was at Georgetown University where I studied international relations, Christian-Muslim relations. Also, I had the opportunity to travel abroad, go to the Middle East, to Jordan and Qatar, and study Arabic. And it was in Georgetown University where 9/11 happened. And I remember I was a sophomore studying Arabic. And one of my fellow students, she came in and she said, you guys all know what happened. And we said, what? She said, oh, we've been attacked. Class was immediately canceled. We tried to run home. Our Nokia cell phones at the time did not work. The cell towers were jammed. As you know, the Pentagon was a site of one of the attacks. So in DC, it was very difficult to go home and leave the city. And I remember going to a roommate, a colleague who was on campus and going to their room and seeing the actual Twin Towers being hit, and all of us thinking or hoping that this was a mistake. But then as we got home, we understood it was more severe, and then realizing that our lives had changed forever. And I share that story because for a lot of you who are in grad school or in undergrad, the events that are happening right now, whether that be climate change, whether that's global hunger, whether it's what's going on in Gaza, all these things will impact your future life and career. And after that attack, the US government actually invested a lot of money into Arabic scholarships, PhD programs. I graduated from Arabic Islamic Studies at Georgetown. That program was newly formed. There was no such program like that. But because the US government and Americans believe that we have to invest in understanding Islam and Islamic traditions. So let's go ahead now and transition to Mary and Maryam and some basic facts about Mary and Maryam in the Islamic tradition. So she's the only female name explicitly mentioned in the Quran. So there are many female figures in the Quran, both positive and negative, and they range from the daughter of Moses to the mother of Moses, to Bilqis, the Queen of Sheba, to the wife of Abu Lahab, one of the people who fought against the Prophet Muhammad. But the idea that she's mentioned by name in the Quran is significant. And I believe it is connected to the idea that those who are named in the Quran, especially in a positive light, are seen as role models for the Prophet Muhammad. So as we'll see, Maryam becomes a role model for the early Muslim community as well as for the Prophet Muhammad himself. She's also mentioned 34 times in the Quran, most of the time in reference to being Jesus' mother. So yes, as we'll discuss, there is a chapter named after Maryam in the Quran, but she is mentioned throughout the Quran. She's not limited to one section. She's not limited to the Meccan era or the Medinan, but rather throughout the Quran from the beginning and mentions her. Also, she's mentioned in the prophetic literature as one of the best women of all time. And this is fascinating because, as we know, that there are many Arab women in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Fatima, his daughter, Khadija, his wife, Aisha, his wife later in life. But the fact that a non-Arab and someone coming from Jerusalem or Sham, the Syrian area, becomes one of the best women of all time is significant. And then there are more verses about her in the Quran than in the Bible itself. And that's really fascinating. And especially when I go speak to Christian audiences, they're really surprised by that. That, in fact, if you look at the Quran and look at how much she's emphasized, is actually more than in the New Testament. And that speaks, I think, once again, to the importance of Maryam in the Quran and in the Islamic tradition. And as we discussed, there is an entire chapter named after her, which we'll dive into. Many people within the Muslim community, Islamic tradition, are familiar. Maybe they've read the chapter of Joseph or Yusuf, or they may be familiar with that of Ibrahim or Abraham. But part of my work is trying to elevate the stature of Maryam within the Islamic tradition and realize that she is a major figure just like those that I mentioned. All right, so let's actually go in and look at some verses from Surah to Maryam, understand their context and their place within Islamic history and tradition. So this is a unique surah. And when I started writing this book, the first chapter was devoted to Maryam in the Quran. And I just became super fascinated and interested with this chapter and saw how unique and special it is within the Quran as a whole. First off, it's the only surah that starts with Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ayn, Swad. So for those of us in Quranic studies, the Quran is often divided between Meccan and Medinan verses, also between the beginning, the longer chapters, and then the smaller, shorter ones. But there is a movement in Quranic studies to look at clusters. And if you look, for example, in the beginning of the Quran, many of them start with Alif Lam Mim. So this is a kind of a cluster of surahs or chapters that come from the Medina era. Later, you go a little further, you see a cluster of chapters that say Alif Lam Ra. And this is from the late Meccan era. So you go later, you see some that say Hamim. And then you have later at the end, you have Qul A'udhu, Rabb Nas, and Qul A'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq, right? Two chapters that have the idea of seeking refuge. So this is the only chapter in the Quran that has this beginning, which demonstrates to me that this is a unique chapter, it's special. It's not necessarily, it is connected, of course, to the rest of the Quran, but it's also special and unique. It's also the only surah with a rhyme scheme, Iya. So as you know, what's one of the major movements in Quranic studies is to think about the rhyme scheme, the sound. and how the sound is connected to the meaning. And many times in the Quran, there are different rhyme schemes, and many of them are in or un, but this is the only one that has iya, that starts from the beginning and then goes all the way to the end. And this is the chapter from the Meccan era. So this is a chapter that emerges from the late Meccan era where the Prophet Muhammad lost his wife, his source of protection and financial support. We also see that he lost Abu Talib, his uncle, someone who took care of him and protected him from other Quraysh tribes. We also see this was a time where the Muslim community was being persecuted. They were nascent, they were small. Eventually, the Prophet Muhammad would send a delegation to go to Abyssinia to seek protection from a Christian king. So many of the themes of vulnerability, of desperation, of hope, of mercy emerge within this chapter. And we see that God is mentioned many times in this surah as Ar-Rahman, as the most merciful. So God is mentioned in the Quran in many different ways. There are 99 names in the Islamic tradition to reference God, but the one that appears most of the time in this chapter is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. So once again, speaking to this idea of early Muslim communities seeking the mercy and compassion of God. And this is the only chapter that uses the word wudda, or intense love. So one of the names of God in the Islamic tradition is Al-Wadud, is the one who is the most loving. And this name is often referenced in connection to forgiveness. But in this chapter, we have a form of this noun and verb used, and it sounds as widda. So this is once again the only chapter that uses this word. So now let's go into the narrative of Surah Maryam and the story of Surah Maryam and see what lessons that we can derive from it. So first off, we see that the Quran starts the story and says, mentioned in the Quran the story of Mary. She withdrew from her family to a place to the east and secluded herself away. We sent our spirit to appear before her in the form of a perfected man. She said, I seek the Lord of mercy's protection against you. If you have any fear of him, do not approach. But he said, I am but a messenger from your Lord to announce to you the gift of a pure son. She said, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? I have not been unchaste. And he said, this is what your Lord said, it is easy for me. We shall make him a sign to all people, a blessing from us. So what's fascinating here is the beginning, that this surah, this section, begins by mentioning that Maryam withdrew from her family to a place to the east and secluded herself away. So that's fascinating because in the biblical tradition, she's actually with her family and that she is singing the praises of God. So there's this element here within this chapter of khalwa, or being alone with God, and having this intimacy with God, which emerges when the various figures are alone. If you go earlier, a couple of verses in this chapter, you have the passionate plea of Zechariah, where he actually goes to God and he says, God, I'm getting old. My bones are brittle. My hair is all white. And I fear that there'll be no one left on this earth to represent me. Please give me a child. And the Quran says that he made this prayer nida and khafiya, that he did this prayer alone, in private. So this is a consistent theme that we see in the Surah Maryam and other parts of the Quran, that divine intimacy occurs when no one's watching, when the protagonist is by themselves and only can seek refuge in God. We also see that this section mentions we sent our spirit. And the classical commentators were fascinated by this, that Maryam was not given a dream or inspiration or had a vision, but it was actually Gabriel himself that came to Mary. And for Qurtubi, one of the scholars which I speak about in the book, this meant that she was a prophet, that she was someone given divine instruction by the most important messenger. And this is significant because, especially in modern Quranic commentary, there is a connection here between Maryam and the Prophet Muhammad, because Maryam, just like the Prophet Muhammad, got revelation or inspiration from that of Gabriel. And the narrative continues. It says, she said, I seek the Lord of mercy's protection against you. If you have any fear of him, do not approach. So this is fascinating in the sense that she does not initially recognize the messenger, that she's actually scared. And many of the commentators explain that her fear is based on the fact that he appeared as a man. And she didn't necessarily recognize him and was worried that this man was going to harm her. However, she seeks refuge once again from God to the Lord of mercy, seeking the divine protection and speaking once again to the idea of her chastity and her own spiritual well-being. Once again, this connects to the story and the life of the Prophet Muhammad, that in the seerah or the prophetic literature and story biography of the Prophet Muhammad, he does not recognize Gabriel at first, that he's in the cave of Hira. The angel comes to him and squeezes him, and he's scared. He's afraid. He actually runs back to his wife Khadija and seeks her aid and comfort. So there's this idea that when revelation comes or when truth emerges, it's not always recognized by the hero and by the protagonist. And then the narrative says, and the messenger explains, I am but a messenger from your Lord, come to announce to you the gift of a pure son. So now the messenger comes clean, explains, and says, hey, I am a messenger. I'm coming from God, and I'm going to tell you that you're going to have a child. You're going to have this miraculous son who is going to be Isa or Jesus. And then she asks this question, right? And this is one of the things I love about the Quranic and biblical narratives. She said, how can I have a son when no man has touched me? I have not been unchaste. So you could imagine that Maryam would just accept, right? This is coming from God. This is coming from Gabriel, Jibreel. That she should just accept that she's going to have a child, no questions asked. But part of this narrative that emerges in the Quranic and biblical figures is that they ask questions. And this is reminiscent of a story in the chapter of Baqarah or the chapter of the cow, where Abraham, he has questions about the idea of resurrection. And he goes to God and says, how is this possible? How is this idea of the living coming from the dead even occur? And God says, Abraham, don't you believe? And he says, yes, I believe, but I want to have tranquility in my heart. I want to see this for myself. And then God tells him to take birds, to slaughter them, put them on different mountains, and then he calls, and then they emerge and come together. So there's this theme that you find within the various traditions and narratives of these figures asking God or questioning and saying, this doesn't make sense. How could this potentially occur? And then the angel responds and says, this is what your Lord said is easy for me. We shall make him a sign to all people, a blessing from us. So he responds to her concern, explaining that this is truly a miracle. This is going to be something that's easy, and that this child that you're going to have is going to be a sign for all of humanity. And then the narrative continues, and so it was ordained. She conceived him. She withdrew to a distant place. And when the pains of childbirth drove her to cling to the trunk of a palm tree, she exclaimed, I wish I had been dead and forgotten long before all of this. But a voice cried out to her from below, do not worry. Your Lord has provided a stream at your feet. And if you shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, it will deliver fresh ripe dates for you. So eat, drink, be glad, and say to anyone you may see, I have vowed to the Lord a mercy to abstain from conversation, and I will not talk to anyone today. So here we see once again the idea of seclusion, that she's about to give birth to her child, her son, and she withdraws to a distant place. So this is mentioned twice in the narrative, the idea of seclusion, of retreat, of seeking refuge, and then the pains of childbirth emerge. And it drives her to a trunk of a palm tree, and then she makes this remarkable proclamation, I wish I had been dead and forgotten long before all of this. Now, when I read this phrase initially, I said to myself, is Maryam being heretical? Right? She's been told that she's going to have a child, that she is going to have a child that'll be a blessing to all of humanity, that this is going to be a miracle and a sign of God. But in this phrase, is she somehow questioning the divine decree? Is she somehow saying it's too hard or too difficult? And here she makes this statement talking about her idea of vulnerability. I wish I had been dead and forgotten long before all of this. And I think this speaks to the early Muslim community at the time. This is in many ways how they felt. They were going through a difficult trial and tribulation, many of them being tortured, persecuted. Eventually, the Muslims would migrate to Medina. And here I want to reference Maria, because there's a debate here I saw in the secondary literature. Why does Maria make this cry, right? And some say that she made this cry because she was ashamed, that she felt this shame that she had this child out of wedlock, and if she went back to her people, that they would see her and they would condemn her and say, how could you have done such a ugly thing? Another camp says, well, that she felt the pain of childbirth. And childbirth, for those who've experienced it, as someone who's witnessed it, right, is very painful. It's very challenging. It's difficult. And in the Quran, it's mentioned that you should be good to your mother because they nursed you, because they carried you, because they had pain in childbirth. And this is a continuation of this Quranic theme. So I really like here how Maria discusses this in the study of Quran. And in the discussion regarding Maryam's cry that she died before this, Maria de Cake understands that this statement is a result of the onset of difficulties she now faced as a woman giving birth to a child alone without a husband, including both the physical pain of labor and embarrassment about what people would think of her. Right. So this, you see, is, I think, a reconciliation of these different points and opinions, that she is first by herself, and this is difficult, but at the same time she feels this physical pain, right? So you see both this emotional and physical pain coming together. The narrative once again continues and says, but a voice cried to her from below, do not worry, your Lord has provided a stream at your feet, and if you shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, it will deliver fresh ripe dates for you. So there's a debate in this tradition about where is this voice coming from. Majority of commentators say this is Gabriel, once again instructing her and telling her what she should do. Another camp says this is actually Jesus, Isa himself. The child is speaking from the womb and telling her how she should act. But what's important here is telling her to be active, to have agency, not let the pain overtake her, but be proactive. And what it specifically says to her is that you should go and shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, and then fresh ripe dates will emerge. And that scene for me was captivating. And when the publisher asked me, what do you want the cover of your book to be? I said, I want it to be Maryam with the palm tree, right? Because I do think that this sign, this scene, is unique to Maryam. The actual words in this verse are hapax, the idea of a jidh of nekhla, that the trunk of the palm tree is only used in the Quran one time, and then this particular circumstance. And it is reminiscent of other famous Quranic and biblical scenes, such as Moses, when he goes out and he's at the Red Sea, he hits the Red Sea with his staff, taking agency, and then God parts it. So I think this scene is an important one in the Quran, and it represents a struggle that many of the protagonists, the key and major figures in the Quran and Bible, face, that when they are seeing overwhelming circumstances and difficulties, they return to the mercy of God, but in a way that represents their agency and their proactive nature. And then the voice continues and says, so eat, drink, be glad. Say to anyone you may see, I have vowed to the Lord in mercy to abstain from conversation, and I will not talk to anyone today. And this, once again, is remarkable and fascinating because it connects her with another Quranic figure, the mother of Mary. So the mother of Moses. The mother of Moses actually puts her child, as you know, into the Nile. He goes to the palace of Pharaoh. He's picked up. And then the sister of Moses, the daughter of his mother, comes and says, I know a person that can take care of this child and feed her. And then eventually Moses returns back to his mother, and the Quran says that we return Moses to you so you would have qurrata ayn, that you would have this happiness and gladness of your eye. So this same phrase is actually used in this chapter to speak of Mary, that in a similar way that she will have this twinkle of her eye, this joyfulness in seeing her son be born. And then at the same time, it says that you should take a vow of silence and that you should abstain from conversation and will not talk to anyone today. And this once again represents a theme within this chapter that the various figures speak. So Mary speaks, right? She speaks about her vulnerability, that she wished she was dead and forgotten. She asks, how could this be? How could I be someone who gives birth to a child when I'm not married? I don't have any sexual relationships. At the same time, Zechariah, as we discussed, Zechariah, he has these feelings as well. And when he expresses them, that he's going to die and be forgotten and he won't have any legacy and progeny on the earth, God responds and gives him Yahya, John the Baptist, but then tells him, now you have to be silent and you can only communicate through sign language. So there's this theme that the various figures in this chapter, they speak, but then they become silent. And the idea is that their silence represents opportunity for others to speak on their behalf. And we see that the word that's used in this particular verse is som, which means fasting. So she's not actually told to be silent in the Arabic sense of sukut or samt, but rather she's told that she should do a fast. So you think about the month of Ramadan, which is the month of fasting. In a similar way, she's told to abstain from speech for the purpose that this abstaining from speech will allow her to gain greater spirituality that will give her the power to confront and return back to her people. She went back to her people carrying the child, and they said, Mary, you have done something terrible. Sister of Aaron, your father was not an evil man, your mother was not unchaste. She pointed at him. They said, how can we converse with an infant? But he said, I am a servant of God. He has granted me the scripture, made me a prophet, made me blessed wherever I may be. He commanded me to pray, to give alms as long as I live, to cherish my mother. He did not make me domineering or graceless. Peace was on me the day I was born, and will be on me the day I die, and the day I'm raised to life again. Such was Jesus, the son of Mary. So she returns now back to her people, and this is really the climax of the story. And there's this really fascinating Iranian film that came out several years ago that speaks to the idea of Mary and Mary representing this religious figure and challenging the larger clerical all-male class. And they really emphasize this scene that when she comes back to her people carrying Isa, Jesus, and when she goes back to her people, they immediately question her and they say, Mary, you have done something that's terrible. And then they go and they speak about her family, right? They say, Mary, mother, you come from a good family, right? You have a mother who was chaste. You have a father that was a good man, right? How could you have done such an evil thing, right? You're someone who has good lineage, right? You're someone that's known to be good. Yourself and your family, your siblings, your mother and father are all known to be righteous. And then she does this fascinating thing where she points to her child. Now, once again, we see in the previous section, she's told to take a fast of silence, that she's not supposed to speak. And you can imagine that someone being attacked, their immediate response would be to defend themselves and say, I didn't do anything wrong. This was a sign of God. This is a miracle. But in this moment, she's told that she cannot speak. So what she does is point to her child, leading them to mock her. And they said, how can we converse with an infant, right? How can a little child begin to speak? And here you can hear as well and understand the early Muslim community and the Prophet Muhammad, who was told that he was a poet and a sorcerer, and they were condemned and mocked. And they were told that you come from good families. How could you abandon your faith and your traditions? And then the miracle occurs, that Jesus, the Quranic Jesus, once again something very unique to the Quran, begins to speak. And he said, I am a servant of God. He granted me the scripture and made me a prophet. So he identifies himself, that he is someone who's given the Gospels, given the Injil, and he is a Nabi, he is a prophet, like the Prophet Muhammad and other prophetic figures like Abraham or Moses. And I've been blessed wherever I may be, that he's known to be a righteous person. God has commanded me to pray, to give alms as long as I live, to cherish my mother. I love that part of the section, that he says that, yes, I pray, that I give zakah or alms, I help the community, I'm spiritual, but I'm not selfish. I'm thinking about the community at large, but he's supposed to be good to his mom. And this is something that you see in the Quranic Jesus, that he's always praising his mom. He's always thanking his mom, right? He's always referenced in relationship to his mom. And he did not make me domineering or graceless. So this is something that Jesus in the Islamic tradition, as well as in the biblical one, is that he's seen as very kind and merciful. That he's not someone who is rash or angry, like Moses, for example, because he was very angry and he grabs his brother's beard and says, "How could you allow the Israelites to worship this calf?" Right? We don't see that with the Quranic Jesus. He is more kind of kind and loving personality. Peace was on me the day I was born, and will be on me the day I die, and the day I'm raised to life again. So the idea of peace once again emerges in this. That yes, he's born, but he's going to pass away, and he'll be raised to life again. And here the verb is used of bath, or the idea of resurrection. That he'll be resurrected, and peace is on his entire life, whether the day he was born or the day he will pass away. And such was Jesus, the son of Mary. And once again, this is a fascinating theme we see that is defining Jesus, but always in reference to his mom. And once again, the commentators say that this speaks to the idea of elevating the idea of Mary. That yes, it's Jesus, but not by himself. How did Jesus emerge? He emerged through Mary, through Maryam. And also a way to speak to the idea of monotheism, that he is the son of Mary, not necessarily the son of God, but he's still someone who's righteous and a prophetic figure. So let me move now to talk about our high status. So as Quranic commentators and scholars throughout history began to read the Quranic narrative, they saw that there's something unique. There's something special going on here that we don't find in other verses or chapters in the Quran, and is also unique to speaking about women. So one of the verses they're fascinated about was this idea, "I'm but a messenger from your Lord, come to announce to you the gift of a pure son." And as I mentioned, there was a school in Islamic Spain. So this was a group of Muslims who had interaction with Christians and Catholics, and they saw how Mary was venerated and cherished within those traditions. And they began to think more critically about Mary, Maryam within their own scripture. And they came to the conclusion, one of them was in Ibn Hazm, the other one in Qurtubi, that Mary was a prophet. And she was a prophet for the idea that she was given direct communication from God. And for Qurtubi, she was not just a prophet, she was one of the best prophets. Because when she was told that this miracle was coming from God, she accepted it. And she didn't question it and ask for a sign like Zechariah did. Also, they were fascinated and drawn to this particular verse, that the angel said to Mary, "Mary, God has chosen you and made you pure. He has truly chosen you above all women." So there's a debate in the Islamic tradition. For Shi'is, primarily the majority school of thought is that Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, is the best woman of all time, because she was like the Prophet Muhammad, has similar mannerisms, lived out his legacy. And for the majority of Sunnis, they would say, based on this verse, that Maryam is the greatest of all time. And this is despite the fact that Maryam is universally understood as a non-Arab. She's not someone that was from the Quraysh tribe or from the life of the Prophet Muhammad. We also see their prophetic reports that speak about her high status. The best women of all creation are Maryam bint Imran, Asiyah bint Muzahim, the wife of Pharaoh, Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, and Fatima bint Muhammad, the daughter of Muhammad. So this hadith or prophetic report encompasses these four great women. And each woman represents a different template, an archetype. The first one is Maryam. And Maryam, as we discussed, is a non-Arab. She's seen as a Christian woman, but she's adopted and becomes part of the Islamic tradition. And she's understood to be the best single mother, right? In the Quran, Joseph, the idea of her being engaged or married is never mentioned. And I believe, once again, that is intentional to elevate herself as a protagonist. Then we see that Asiyah bint Muzahim, the wife of Pharaoh, the one that saw Moses in the Nile, that wants to adopt him and raise him in the palace. And this, once again, represents the archetype of a foster parent, a stepmother. And we see this also in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, that he was a foster parent in raising Zayd. So this idea that this woman is also part of the biblical tradition. She's seen as a Jewish kind of woman, an Israelite from the story of the Moses period, but she's adopted and made part of the Islamic tradition. And then we have Khadija bint Khuwaylid, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, his first wife, his confidant, the one that he goes to after the first revelations, the one that comforts him, that hugs him, and says, God will not forsake you, and points him to her cousin Waraka bin Nofel, and then Fatima, his daughter, the one that's seen as the best of all daughters. And there's a famous tradition where the Prophet Muhammad went to Fatima and whispered in her ear, and she began to cry. And then he whispered again, and she began to laugh. And then later they asked Fatima, what did he say? And she said, first he came to me and whispered in my ear that I'm going to pass away soon. So I started to cry. And then he whispered into my ear that you will soon after follow me. And we know from the life of the Prophet Muhammad that she passed away several months later. So she was seen as the mother of her father, someone who took care of her father, that resembled him and was always there to support him. So we see in this tradition an Abrahamic theme. That you have a quote-unquote Christian woman, that Mary of Assia representing the Israel, the Jewish tradition, and then two Arab Muslims, but they're all Islamicized and become part of the Islamic tradition. And then we see the idea of paradise emerge. The best women of paradise are Khadija bin Khuwaylid and Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad, Maryam bint Imran, and Asya bint Muzahim, the wife of Pharaoh. So once again, these four women emerge, and they're seeing that they're going to go to paradise. And one of the things that I emphasize in my book is that in this tradition, all of them are represented as daughters. So sometimes when we look at Mary, we always see her as a mother. She's the mother of Jesus. She is the mother of Christ. She's the mother of our Savior. But when we look in the Quran and the prophetic tradition, she's not always mentioned as a mother. She's actually mentioned as a daughter. And she's the daughter of Imran. She is a daughter before she becomes a mother. And we actually have in the Quran an Islamic or a story about her own birth and her own origin. That her mother comes and says, God, I'm making an oath that whatever is in my stomach is a sacrament to you, that I'm devoting this child to the temple. But then she has a daughter, right? And she was expecting a son that will grow up and become a rabbi and religious leader. And then all of a sudden, there is a girl. And she becomes afraid and she becomes disappointed and she doesn't know what she's going to do. But then the divine voice says, no, the male and female are different. And this woman, this daughter of yours is special, and we're naming her Maryam. And this is, I believe, a larger theme within the Quran of emphasizing daughters, that the pre-Islamic Arabs used to bury their daughters, and the Quranic narrative and the Prophet Muhammad came and said, this is a practice that should be extinguished. And also we see this with the life of the Prophet Muhammad himself, where he never had any sons that grew to adulthood. He had all daughters, and he praises his own daughter in various traditions. So to conclude, I want to emphasize, how is Maryam relevant today? So when I was in college and when I did my grad work around 20 years ago, 10, 15 years, there was a big emphasis on Abraham. So after 9/11, there was this big push talking about Abrahamic religions, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, we should all come together, understand our differences and our similarities, and end this family feud, right? There was this idea that the Jews and Christians come from Isaac, Ishaq, and that the Prophet Muhammad comes from Ishmael, Ismail. And these two different lines can reunite and come to a better understanding, and that could lead to world peace and understanding. However, in the last couple of years, I've seen a shift. And in that shift, we see a new emphasis on Mary. So in the last 10 years, there's been about 3 to 4 different books. So my book is part of that tradition of trying to emphasize the role of Mary, Maryam. And I believe this shift has occurred because there is a renewed interest in Christian-Muslim relations, the ideas of motherhood, female spirituality, leadership, and the role of women in society. This is something that emerges through studying Maryam, which you don't necessarily get with Abraham. Abraham's a classic patriarch. He has sons, and he is told to sacrifice even his progeny, and he is someone who is understood to be a Muslim or someone who submits to God. Also, we see that global demographics are changing. And by the year 2050, and I tell my students, hopefully by that year I'll be retired. I'll be collecting pension, I'll be on an island. But in 2050, many of you in this room will be in my position, leaders, scholars, teachers, entrepreneurs. And in that world, Christians and Muslims will be roughly the same number. We'll have around 3 billion Christians and 3 billion Muslims, which is a remarkable number. And we see that about 30% of the world would be Christian and around 30% will be Muslim. So the majority of the world's population would be either Christian and Muslim. And then peace between these two different religious groups is essential. And you see this within certain documents. So this is a common word that emerged in Amman, Jordan in 2007. And this was a Muslim-initiated document during the Iraq War and a couple of years after 9/11. And it begins and says, Muslims and Christians together make up well over half of the world's population. Without peace and justice between these two religious communities, there can be no meaningful peace in the world. The future of the world depends on peace between Muslims and Christians. And I think that's remarkable because later it will go and speak about theological similarities and differences. But the fact that it starts, this is the first lines of this document, shows that the authors understood that this is not simply a theological debate or discussion, but has real world political and economic implications. And we see in this new world where Christians and Muslims are increasing, that shared devotional sites have emerged. And this is one, the Virgin Mary House in Turkey, a house that I haven't gone to, but I hope to in the future, that was initially a Christian site, that there were some visions of a peasant woman, that she believed that this house was the place where Mary lived her last days. And many Christians, Catholics came together and they said, we're going to preserve this house. But in the last 50 years, Muslims have actually began going to this house. And if you go to this particular pilgrimage site, you see one room is devoted to Christianity, to Christians, where you have a statue of Mary, and another room devoted to Muslims. And Surat Maryam, which we just discussed, is written in Arabic. And there are places where actually people go and they hang different prayers. Prayers regarding childbirth, having children, and also seeking the mercy and pleasure of God. And we see Mary, Maryam, referenced a lot in our contemporary challenges of Islamophobia. So as you know, Islamophobia is built on this idea of difference, that Muslims and Arabs, they're completely different from us, that they have nothing in common, that we as Westerners are completely different than the East and the Orient. And Islamophobia manifests itself in this idea of difference, but then can lead to political violence as well as hate speech and mockery. So many Muslims have adopted Mary as a way to combat Islamophobia. So this is one billboard that mentions the Blessed Mary, where the hijab will be respected. So the idea of Mary representing someone who is a bridge figure between Islam and Christianity and actually embodies certain characteristics and habits that we think are only Muslim, but are actually found within Christian history and tradition. And we see that in this moment where many of my students are thinking about social justice and equity in global affairs, Maryam is important in terms of global justice. And someone who mentions her is Mona Haider. She is an artist and rapper who has certain music videos on barbarism and Rap My Hijab. And she talks about the idea of faith and spirituality as combating stereotypes and Islamophobia. And she has this fascinating interfaith encounter in this recent documentary, Great Muslim American Road Trip, where she enters into a church in New Mexico, and she sees a statue of Mary. And she begins to be in a state of awe. And she starts to have this conversation with a pastor, a priest who is there. And they begin to exchange notes and about their different experiences with Mary within their respective traditions. And she mentions that Mona shares that Maryam is an inspiration to her in a way that she was tender and loving and devout to God, so much so that she could raise a child that could change the entire world. So Mona, in many ways, identifies with Maryam as being a faithful and spiritual woman, and as a mother, because Mona is a mother herself. And she draws inspiration for her in terms of advancing social justice and fighting against Islamophobia. So to conclude, we see the importance of Mary and Maryam in Islam. And part of my work first initially started on Abraham. If you look at my initial articles, especially in grad school and afterwards, I was fascinated with Abraham as an iconoclast, the sacrifice of Abraham. And as I continued to do more research, I understood that Mary is a central figure in Islam and should be understood as one of the major figures, maybe on a similar level to that of Abraham, of Moses, of Joseph, and so forth. We also see that the story of Mary and Maryam in the Quran, and we went through that representing the different verses, how it represents this dark time in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, the early Muslim community, how it's a story that represents vulnerability, hope, fear, referencing the mercy of God, and how it represents the idea of fasting, of abstaining for a higher spiritual purpose, and having other people speak on your behalf. And then we mentioned the idea of Maryam's high status, the discussion of her being a prophet, which is a minority position in Islam. Majority of Muslims today would understand her to be a righteous woman, a siddiqah, as someone who is trustworthy, truthful, sincere. But at the same time, many Quranic commentators reference her as the best of all women and her as being one of the masters of paradise. And we see Maryam's relevance today. So in a world that we're growing up in, and many of you will take over, this world will be a world where Christians and Muslims will be the majority of the world's population, that they'll demographically be equal in number, and it'll be a world that demands social justice. What are Christians, Muslims, people of all faiths and backgrounds doing to make the world better in terms of hunger, in terms of poverty, in terms of climate change? And I believe that in this new world that we are all moving towards, that Maryam's story is important and inspirational, because all of us want to live our modern lives. We like our phones, we love our tablets, but at the same time, we want to be connected to history and tradition. And I believe Maryam is someone that emerges from this Near Eastern classical traditional period, but she continues to inspire people in the modern age. Thanks so much. So I hope you all will stay in touch. This is my website. You can email me and also find me on social media. I have a podcast called The Islamic Mary, as well as contribute to a Maidan podcast called A Common Word. So thanks so much.